Hello, my name is Marcella, and 3 weeks ago my grandmother, who everyone said was too far gone to speak, whispered 5 words that changed everything. Sweetheart, don't drink that. They told me she was confused, that I was confused, that I always made things bigger than they were. But then the wine glass ended up in the wrong hands, and someone collapsed. Now I can't stop wondering, was I ever really part of this family? Or just a name they needed on the will? What kind of people drug their own sister to steal everything she was meant to inherit? And if my grandmother hadn't warned me, would anyone have believed me at all? The first thing I noticed was the seat. Tucked neatly at the end of a long, linen-draped table in a private dining room, it was the only one positioned near the restroom hallway, too far from the center of attention, yet just close enough to hear every awkward flush. My name wasn't even on the place card. Just a handwritten guest. I smiled tightly, not wanting to make a scene. I'd learned over the years that raising a flag too early only gave them time to deny it all. So I slid into the chair and laid my purse on my lap, quietly watching the rest of my family float in like they owned the place. Isolde entered last, dressed in a charcoal gray sheath that screamed polished power. Her husband, Marlon, trailed behind her, slightly out of breath, already loosening his collar like the meal might choke him. She scanned the room with that calculated cheerfulness I'd come to dread. "Oh good, we're all here," she said brightly. "Let's begin." The staff brought out hors d'oeuvres on sleek trays, and a server poured expensive red wine into everyone's glass, everyone's but mine. Then, with almost theatrical timing, a different server approached me separately. "This one's for you," she said, placing a tulip-shaped glass in front of me. It was specially selected, specially selected. That phrase rolled over me like sour milk. Isolde beamed. "I remembered how much you loved that Pinot from Willamette Valley. You always were the wine snob, Marcella." "Thanks," I said, my voice caught between politeness and warning. I didn't touch the glass. Not yet. After the appetizer plates were cleared, Isolde stood and tapped her glass with the back of a spoon. "I just want to take a moment," she began, smiling that closed-lip, media-trained smile, "to thank you all for coming tonight. We are, despite the occasional differences, a family, and this dinner is to honor the woman who held us all together for so long." She gestured toward our grandmother, Evelyn, seated near the head of the table. Her hands rested motionless in her lap. Her expression was blank, almost wax-like, as though someone had turned the brightness down inside her. "She may not remember all the details anymore," Isolde continued, "but we remember for her. We carry her legacy." I looked around the table. The slideshow began on a screen behind Isolde. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, baby showers. Isolde was in nearly every photo. Marlon appeared often. Even my cousin Delilah had her fair share. I wasn't in a single shot. Not one. No image of the long weekends I spent caring for Grandma when her health declined. No photos from the holidays I rearranged my work schedule to attend, just to make sure she didn't spend them alone. Not even a blurry shot from last Thanksgiving, when I held her hand during a panic episode no one else knew how to manage. I forced my lips into a smile, the kind that says, "This doesn't bother me," even though it does. A lot. Dinner progressed with polite conversation and overly generous laughter. The kind of noise people make when they're trying too hard to sound united. Then came the wine. Another toast. "To Evelyn," Marlon said, raising his glass. "And to those who care for her day in and day out." I raised my water glass. My wine sat untouched. Isolde leaned over and nudged it gently. "Marcella, come on. Don't make it weird." I picked it up, fingers loose around the stem. Then I heard it. "Sweetheart, don't drink that." It was barely more than breath, a whisper low enough that I almost thought I imagined it. But I looked over, and Grandma Evelyn was looking straight at me. For the first time all evening, her eyes were sharp, focused, alive. I froze. Everyone else was too busy laughing, too wrapped up in their roles. No one heard her. But I did. Her lips moved again, slower this time. "Please." That was all I needed. My heart thudded, but my hands moved smoothly, calmly. I turned slightly to the side, reaching toward my purse as though to grab a napkin. In that motion, I swapped my glass with Marlon's, whose wine was still untouched. I took a small sip from the water I'd asked for earlier. Placed the wine, now his, back in front of him. Isolde didn't notice. She was too busy chatting about a new property investment opportunity. Marlon picked up the glass moments later, swirling it the way pretentious drinkers do. He took a long sip. I looked at Grandma. Her eyes were closed again, but for that one brief moment, she had been with me. And that was the moment I knew. If I didn't start paying closer attention, I wouldn't survive this night. I didn't rush. I wanted them to think I was calm, still weighing my options, but my mind was already working at full tilt. As I settled back into my chair, the clinking of silverware and clatter of half-hearted laughter returned like background noise I could no longer ignore. Marlon was across from me, pushing his food around like a kid who'd lost his appetite. His forehead glistened with sweat, though the room wasn't particularly warm. He tugged twice at his collar and tried to brush it off with a joke about holiday stress and too much Pinot. No one seemed to notice the sheen on his temples, but me. I scanned the table. Isolde was talking animatedly with Aunt Marion about a fundraising gala she helped host. She didn't glance in my direction. Grandma Evelyn had fallen quiet again, her eyes focused somewhere in the distance, as if tuning all of us out by force of will. I stayed silent, watching. Then I spoke. "Something feels off," I said, almost casually, but loud enough for the table to hear. That wine didn't smell right. Isolde's head whipped toward me. She blinked once and then burst into a sharp laugh. "Oh, Marcella, come on! Not everything's a conspiracy." Marlon chuckled weakly beside her, probably trying to keep up appearances. Someone else added with a smirk, "She's always been the dramatic one." It was like high school all over again, being labeled the odd one out for pointing out what everyone else pretended not to see. My cheeks flushed, but I held my posture. I could almost hear the mental notes being taken around the table. Here she goes again, always so sensitive, always causing a scene. Grandma didn't laugh. She didn't blink, but her fingers tapped slowly against the edge of her water glass. That was enough for me. Dinner continued, awkwardly, until a man I didn't recognize stepped into the room. Tall, mid-50s, navy suit, sharp tie. He had the kind of presence that didn't need announcing. Isolde rose to greet him with both hands. "Marcella," she said, gesturing. "This is Mr. Forrester. He's been advising the family on some of the transition paperwork for Grandma." "For what exactly?" I asked, not budging from my seat. Mr. Forrester gave me a thin smile and pulled out a folder. "Just some standard care authorization documents, mutual protection and continuity of care. Nothing alarming." He set the folder in front of me and opened it to the signature page. Always the trick. Show the end first, gloss over the rest. I didn't sign. I turned the pages backward, one by one, reading the headers, scanning the fine print. "General power of attorney?" I read aloud. "This says I'd be transferring full legal authority, financial and medical, for Evelyn Hargrove to Isolde Hargrove." Forrester didn't flinch. "That's a standard structure in estate planning when there's risk of cognitive decline. It just ensures decisions can be made without delay." "Without me?" I asked, my voice suddenly louder than I intended. He shifted slightly. "You'd still be informed, of course." I looked to Isolde. She was smiling the way people do when they think they've already won, like she'd built the road I was walking on, and she knew every turn I hadn't taken yet. I snapped the folder shut. "I'm going to need a moment alone with my grandmother before signing anything," I said clearly, folding my napkin and placing it beside my untouched plate. Isolde's smile wavered for just a second. "Marcella," she said with that condescending tone she reserved for teachable moments, "we've already had these discussions. The paperwork is just a formality." "No," I said flatly. "You've had those discussions, without me, and without her consent." Forrester started to speak again, but I was already helping Grandma Evelyn to her feet. She didn't resist. Her hand slid into mine, like she'd been waiting for it all night. In the quiet hallway outside the dining room, I guided her to a bench beside the coat check. We sat. I leaned in close. Do you remember anything about signing legal documents this month, Grandma? I asked gently. She blinked a few times. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse but certain. Your sister. She brought papers. Said it was for doctor visits. I didn't understand, but she told me to just sign. A cold wave spread through my chest. Not shock this time, confirmation. I had seen it before. At work, I'd watched sons and daughters file guardianship over parents who weren't truly incompetent, just inconvenient. I'd read reports, sat in elder abuse training sessions. This was textbook manipulation, and now it had a name, Isolde. Back in the day room, they were likely toasting to family unity and clinking glasses over their smooth maneuvering, but I wasn't done yet. I helped Grandma to her feet again. You doing okay? She smiled softly. Now that you're here. I walked her back to the table just as dessert was being served. Forrester stood up, ready to resume the formality. No rush, he said with practiced patience, but we'd like to wrap this up before dessert is cleared. I placed the unopened folder squarely in front of him and sat down slowly. I looked Isolde dead in the eye. I'm not signing a damn thing tonight, I said, calm but firm. She flinched, barely. That kind of language isn't necessary. I didn't blink. You're right. What's necessary is that you stop assuming I'll stay quiet just because I have before. Her face twitched. Marlon cleared his throat. Maybe we can revisit this over the weekend? I smiled politely at him. No. We'll revisit this in front of my lawyer. That was the moment Isolde's fingers tightened around her wine glass, and mine let go of any illusion that this dinner was ever about family. I guided Grandma down the hallway under the pretense of needing fresh air, but my chest was burning. I didn't care who saw me anymore. Anyone watching could think I was being overly cautious or dramatic again. Let them. I'd rather be the difficult one than the silent fool who signed her grandmother's life away. We passed the coat rack and found an empty bench tucked into a side corridor that overlooked the hotel garden. She sat with a sigh, her gaze still distant, but I saw flickers of awareness under the surface, like candlelight behind frosted glass. Do you remember, I asked softly, what you said about the estate? That everything was already written down? That it would come to me? She blinked, slowly, then turned her head toward me. They said I signed something, she murmured. But I don't remember. That was all I needed to hear. Not because it was definitive, but because it wasn't. Her uncertainty, her honest confusion, was proof enough that this entire guardianship claim was rotten at the core. I reached into my purse and carefully unfolded the discreet photo I'd snapped of the paperwork earlier. I hadn't even had time to read it thoroughly, but now, in the relative quiet, I scanned the text again. There it was. Medical guardianship filed and approved. Witness, Isolde Hargrove. Signatory, Evelyn Hargrove. Effective date, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. That's when Isolde canceled our weekly video call, claiming Grandma wasn't feeling up to it. That was the day she started screening Grandma's phone. My hands trembled, not with fear but fury. I'd seen this exact setup too many times in my career, the perfectly staged caregiver, the elderly parent who slowly disappears from their own life, and a paper trail that magically rewrites everything they ever intended. And now it was happening in my own family. I excused myself and walked briskly toward the restrooms, phone already in hand. I locked myself in the farthest stall and sat down, back against the door. It took me 2 tries to unlock my screen with my thumbprint. I texted Sarah, my old colleague from the memory care facility. She had since moved into private consulting for elder law firms. She knew this world, knew it inside out. I sent her a picture of the document and one line. Is this what I think it is? Her response came within 2 minutes. Yup, full guardianship, legal and medical. Signed and sealed. And then, just beneath that, if this was coerced, you have a fight on your hands. I pressed the back of my head against the cold wall and exhaled slowly. My mind drifted somewhere I hadn't let it go in years, back to when I was 16 and our father fell ill. I remembered sitting in the hallway outside the ICU while Isolde argued with the doctors about who would make decisions. She wasn't even the eldest then, just the most insistent. She knew how to sound reasonable, how to use words like practical and efficient, while shutting down anything I said as emotional or hysterical. She convinced our parents that I was fragile, that I couldn't handle big decisions, that I was too close to the fire to see straight. I had let her say it, back then. I had let her paint me into the corner of the family story, where I didn't belong in the room where it happened. Not this time. Not again. I got up, splashed cold water on my face at the sink, and stared at my reflection. My eyes weren't the same as they used to be. There was no doubt in them anymore, only the kind of stillness that comes after a storm has done its worst, and you're the only one left standing. I whispered to the mirror, "I'm not that little girl anymore." Then I opened my contacts and found the name I never thought I'd need in this context. Allison Hart, Elder Rights Attorney. I typed, "Emergency consult needed. Immediate. Family guardianship dispute. I have copies." I hit send. By the time I walked back into the dining room, dessert had been served. Forks were scraping plates, the room filled with idle chatter. But everything felt quieter somehow, like they sensed I'd crossed a line they hadn't prepared for. Mr. Forrester looked up from his seat beside Isolde, ready to resume his calm, professional script. But I wasn't here to play anymore. I pulled my chair out and sat beside Grandma again. And her eyes followed me like they had when I was 5, showing her a school project she didn't quite understand, but still loved because I made it. Isolde leaned forward. "Marcella, we really should wrap this up before things get awkward." I met her gaze. "You're late for awkward." Her nostrils flared. "Why are you making this so difficult? It's just a formal process. No one's trying to cut you out." I tapped the document folder. "Then why is your name listed as the sole point of medical and financial control?" Mr. Forrester chimed in, clearly rehearsed. "We can always amend those portions, of course, if there's concern." "Concern?" I asked, blinking slowly. "You've got my grandmother's signature on a legal document she doesn't even remember signing. You've witnessed it yourself. She can't recall giving that permission." "She was lucid at the time," Isolde said quickly. "You're sure?" I asked, louder now. "Because she just told me she was confused. And if that's the case, this entire guardianship could be challenged." Marlon looked uneasy for the first time that evening. He poured himself another glass of wine, his third. "I think we're getting ahead of ourselves," he muttered. "No," I said. "You got ahead of me, and now I'm catching up." I turned toward Grandma and gently pushed her dessert plate closer. "You okay, Grandma?" She nodded slowly. "I just want to go home." I smiled. "We'll make sure that happens." Isolde started to speak again, but I cut her off. "This isn't over, and it's not going to end quietly." She froze, fork halfway to her mouth, and I sat back, watching her for the first time as a woman who wasn't afraid of her sister anymore. For the first time that night, silence worked in my favor. I didn't need to shout or defend myself. Just being quiet, composed, was louder than anything Isolde could fake. I sat back down next to Grandma, careful not to let my hands show how tightly they were clasped beneath the table. I kept my expression neutral, maybe even polite, as I pushed the folder of documents toward the lawyer with 2 fingers. "We're not signing anything tonight," I said evenly. A tremor passed across Isolde's lips, barely visible. But I saw it, and she knew I did. There was a moment of awkward shifting. A few guests glanced around, confused. One of the cousins coughed to fill the space. The tension crackled. Isolde adjusted her napkin like she was straightening a power tie. "Marcella," she began, soft and saccharine, "I know all of this feels overwhelming. You've always had a hard time with complicated decisions." And there it was, that backhanded, silk-wrapped dagger she'd used for decades. Before I could respond, she turned to the lawyer and said with a sympathetic shrug, "She's had a history, emotional challenges. We've all tried to help her work through it." I could feel every eye turn to me like I'd suddenly grown horns. Isolde wasn't loud, but she didn't have to be. She was effective, calm, practiced. She's been in therapy for years. It's helped, of course, but, well, when things get emotionally charged, she tends to spiral. It's why we didn't want to burden her with all the estate logistics. That landed like a slap across the face, not because it was completely false. I had seen a therapist after my divorce, but because she'd twisted healing into weakness. Again, the table was dead silent. Then someone, probably one of our second cousins, murmured, "Didn't she have some breakdown a while back?" And just like that, the narrative shifted. I felt the burn in my throat but didn't let it rise. I placed both hands flat on the table. I turned to look at Grandma, who sat blinking slowly, her spoon tapping against her cup. She looked disoriented, unsure why the room had chilled so fast. And I cleared my throat. My voice, when it came, was calm, clear. "You know what's funny?" I said, eyes back on Isolde. "Mental illness only seems to exist when it's inconvenient to your bank account." You could have heard a napkin drop. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should reconvene." "No," I cut in. "Let's stay. Everyone seems quite invested now." I stood, steadying myself with one hand against the table's edge. "When we were kids," I began, keeping my gaze steady, "any time I cried at a birthday party or wanted to leave early, you told people I was too sensitive. If I disagreed, I was hysterical. If I stayed quiet, I was moody. You didn't correct anyone. You built the whole narrative." Isolde's jaw tensed, but she didn't speak. I let the silence do the work. "Do you remember that Christmas when I was 12? I asked her. "You told Aunt June I made up stomach aches just to avoid chores. I threw up in the garage 20 minutes later. A few people glanced away. Marlon focused hard on his glass. And high school?" I added. "When Mom found those journal pages I wrote and thought I was suicidal, you told her I was dramatic for attention. You told her to take away my books instead of getting me help." Isolde finally broke her silence. "That was a long time ago, Marcella." "Not long enough," I said. I turned toward the rest of the table, my eyes moving across faces that had either believed her or pretended not to hear. Every woman in this room has been labeled too emotional at some point, by a brother, a father, a husband, or a sister who didn't want to deal with them. Someone gasped quietly. Grandma's spoon stopped moving. "I've spent my life believing I had to prove I wasn't broken," I continued. "All because someone decided my feelings were a liability." I paused, then looked straight at the lawyer. "So if anyone here thinks I'll just sit down and sign away my grandmother's future to protect a narrative that never served me in the first place, think again." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I said it like I was reading off a grocery list, and somehow, that was more unnerving than shouting. I watched as Isolde's face drained of color. "I don't care what tricks you used to get those signatures," I said. "But if any further legal actions are taken without my review, I will pursue criminal charges. Guardianship fraud carries real penalties." Marlon muttered something, maybe a protest, but no one echoed him. The lawyer blinked twice, silent. I turned back to Isolde one final time. She was stone still. "And trust me," I said, leaning just slightly forward, "I've done my research." She flinched. Just a flicker, but enough. I watched the color drain slightly from her face, the usual ironclad expression beginning to crack. And in that small shift, I felt it, that shift in power. But I didn't let it show. I simply returned to my seat and picked up my water glass with the same hand that had just metaphorically slammed a door in her face. The lights dimmed again, signaling another video segment. I should have known better than to believe she was finished. That was never Isolde's style. She wasn't the kind of person who took a blow and walked away. She struck back, prettily, politely, and with precision. "Let's take a quick walk down memory lane," she said from her chair, her voice honeyed and casual, like a TV anchor tossing to a feel-good clip. "This one's called Family Legacy Moments. You're going to love this." The screen lit up behind her, showing faded home videos set to a soft, nostalgic piano track. Laughter, family barbecues, birthday candles. Clip after clip played, Evelyn brushing a child's hair, holding Isolde's daughter at a recital, hugging our uncle at his retirement party. Then came last Thanksgiving. Or rather, the pieces of it they chose to keep. I remembered filming a moment that day, just me and Grandma in the living room, sitting on the couch as she clutched my hand and whispered, "Marcella's the only one I trust, the only one who checks on me when no one else does." It was the one clip I had made sure to send to Isolde just weeks ago when she asked for anything heartwarming for the slideshow. I even labeled the file Grandma Thanks Marcella.move. It was missing. My stomach turned to stone. Every other family member had their moment, their hug, their tearful speech, their nostalgic frame frozen in time. I had nothing, not even a background blur. You'd think I wasn't even there. I sat frozen, hands clenched in my lap, a polite smile pasted to my face as the room filled with applause. It was subtle, it was cruel, it was entirely intentional. Isolde glanced at me just once during the clapping, just enough to let me know she knew I'd noticed, and that she didn't care. The server returned with dessert, something rich and elegant in a shallow dish. I didn't touch it. Isolde tapped her spoon against her glass again. Before we dig in, one last moment of gratitude. She turned toward her daughter, who looked about as enthusiastic as any teenager being pulled into adult drama. "I want to pass down something very special," Isolde said, drawing out the moment with the expertise of someone who'd practiced in a mirror. She reached into her purse and retrieved a small velvet box. The second I saw it, I knew. The ring. Grandma's sapphire ring. She had worn it for over 40 years. It was never flashy, but it was always meaningful. She told me when I was 15 that one day it would be mine. "For sticking around when no one else does," she had said. And now, under soft lighting and sugary smiles, Isolde was about to hand it to someone else. She opened the box. The sapphire glinted under the lights. "This ring has been in our family for generations," she said, "and tonight, I'm giving it to the next strong woman in our line." She turned and placed it into her daughter's hand. The girl stared at it blankly, not even putting it on. She looked confused, maybe even embarrassed. Grandma blinked at the exchange, her eyes darting back and forth like she wasn't sure what just happened. Neither was I at first. Then I felt it. The rising heat in my face, the pressure in my chest, the sense of erasure creeping up my throat like a chokehold. They weren't just trying to control the future, they were rewriting the past. I remembered being 15, standing beside Grandma as she gardened in the backyard, sweat beading on our foreheads. She slipped the ring from her finger and said, "Try it on. Someday it's yours. You don't quit on people. That's rare." And now I was watching that promise be pawned off like a party favor. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping lightly against the floor. A few heads turned. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. "You've crossed a line," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "The next time you try to erase me, make sure there's no camera in the room." That hit harder than I expected. A few people blinked. Marlon dropped his fork. Isolde tilted her head and gave a breathy laugh. "She's just tired," she said to no one in particular. "She gets like this during the holidays." No one laughed with her. I walked around the table to Grandma, leaned in, and kissed her cheek. She whispered, almost reflexively, "Did I forget something?" "No," I murmured. "They did. But I remember. I always remember." I turned back to the table and looked directly at my sister. "If you thought I was tired," I said, "you'll hate what I'm like when I'm wide awake." I'd barely touched my dessert. My spoon lay idle, gathering condensation as the ice cream melted around it. A few people at the table were whispering now, not loudly, but just enough that their words floated across the air like steam. They weren't whispering about Isolde. They were whispering about me, and that's when I knew I needed more than words. I excused myself from the table, saying I needed to speak with one of the staff about Grandma's medication. No one questioned me. Isolde just waved her hand dismissively, like I was off to do another of my delicate errands. In the hallway near the kitchen, I took a slow breath and reached into my coat pocket. My phone, unlocked and ready. I opened the voice memo app and tapped record. Then I slipped it into the inside lining of my blazer, right behind the lapel. One smooth touch, tucked neatly, facing outward. The phone screen went dark, but I knew it was still rolling. I'd seen enough courtroom footage to know that hearsay doesn't hold up. You need voices, words, tone. Even better if it's casual, unprompted. I pulled my shoulders back, gave my face a quick look in the hallway mirror, and returned to the dining room. Everyone was still picking at dessert. The atmosphere had shifted, a little colder. Marlon looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his watch. Isolde, on the other hand, was smiling again. Too wide, too perfect. She'd likely convinced herself she was back in control. "So," I said, settling into my chair and placing my napkin across my lap like I hadn't just re-entered as a one-woman investigation unit. "Let's talk about the paperwork again." Isolde tilted her head. "Still hung up on that?" "Marcella, it's just legal housekeeping." "Right," I replied. Funny how fast that housekeeping got done. Quicker than Grandma's doctor appointments, apparently. Marlon chuckled weakly, eyes darting toward Isolde. "We were lucky," he said. "One of my guys, paralegal friend, owed me a favor." There it was. I nodded slowly. "So, no waiting period? No cognitive assessment follow-up?" Just, boom! Signature, filed, done? Isolde gave him a sharp look, but it was too late. Marlon, ever the loyal husband, didn't realize he'd already handed me a confession. "Look," she said, voice suddenly low and patronizing. "It's not like we forged anything. Evelyn signed the documents. You're acting like we hijacked the woman." "She doesn't remember signing anything," I said flatly. "She thought it was for medical release forms, not a transfer of legal power." "That's her memory," Isolde said, lifting her wineglass. "You know how she gets sometimes." I glanced at Grandma. She was staring down at her spoon, tracing the rim of her bowl in slow, distracted circles. "You're lucky no one pressed charges," Isolde added under her breath, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Dragging the family through your paranoia." And just like that, I felt the familiar rage bubble under my skin. I didn't need to scream. The tape was rolling. I leaned forward. "You should really watch what you say. Things tend to have a way of resurfacing." Before she could reply, a younger cousin, Leah, maybe 16, squeezed between chairs behind me, trying to pass Marlon a fresh napkin. As she leaned over, her elbow knocked against my shoulder. My phone tumbled from inside my jacket pocket and clattered onto the floor, screen up. The glowing words on the screen said it all. Voice memo, recording, 17:12. Time stopped. Leah froze. The entire table went quiet. Marlon's chair scraped as he stood abruptly. "What the hell is this?" Isolde's face twisted. "You were recording us? At a family dinner?" I stood too. "Yes. I was—" Marlon snatched the phone off the ground before I could. He held it like it was a loaded weapon, his face redder than the wine he'd spilled earlier. "You've lost your mind," he muttered, gripping the phone tighter. "That's my property," I said, stepping forward. "Hand it over." Isolde got up now too, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't give it to her. She'll edit the audio, make it sound worse than it is." "Worse than what?" I asked, voice rising. "Then you admitting you pushed Grandma into signing legal documents she didn't understand? Then using a backdoor legal favor to file paperwork behind my back?" Grandma looked up now. Her voice was small but clear. "Marcella, what's happening?" I turned to her. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm just making sure the truth stays recorded this time." Someone in the corner dropped their spoon. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Isolde took a deep breath and tried to smile again. "You're overreacting." "You've always had trust issues, Marcella. Maybe it's time you admitted that." "And maybe," I said slowly, taking the phone from Marlon's loosened grip, "you've gotten too used to no one calling you out." I held the phone up. This dinner wasn't about family. It was a setup. I looked around the room, letting the words settle. "I'm done being quiet." Then I turned, walked toward the exit, and just before I crossed the threshold, I glanced back at the lawyer still seated at the table. "I'll see you in court." The room didn't just go quiet when I returned. It froze. Forks hovered above plates. Conversations paused mid-sentence. It was the kind of stillness that only happens after someone has made a move you didn't see coming. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I walked slowly, back to my seat beside Grandma, her eyes following me with that flicker of trust I clung to all night. She didn't say anything, but her hand gently found mine under the table, and that was enough. Isolde, of course, broke the silence. "Well," she said brightly, a practiced sparkle in her voice, "I think we all need to reset the mood, don't we?" She stood with her wine glass held high, beaming like a hostess at a charity gala. To healing and unity. Because no matter what differences we've had, this family is still a family, and family sticks together. I said nothing, but I raised my glass, just as she handed it to me, personally, like some kind of ceremonial chalice. The stem was cool in my hand. She leaned in slightly as I accepted it, whispering, "No more games, little sister. Be smart." I smiled. Then I reached for Marlin's untouched glass the moment she turned her back. A subtle switch, one she wouldn't notice. I had the reflexes of someone who'd worked with people slipping into dementia, who'd learned how to keep calm while rearranging danger into safety without drawing attention. Now I had her wine, and Marlin had mine. I watched him sip it during the next round of small talk. He seemed oblivious, focused more on texting someone under the table than paying attention to anything I was doing. For about 10 minutes, things seemed almost normal. Forced laughter returned. Silverware clinked. One of the aunts made a half-hearted joke about too many lawyers at the table. Then I saw it. Marlin's face. His eyelids drooped a little too fast. His hand missed his fork. He blinked, confused, then shifted awkwardly in his seat. "Babe?" Isolde asked, the first edge of concern in her voice. "I'm fine," he slurred, reaching for his water, but knocking it into his plate instead. He tried to stand. That's when his knees buckled. The chair clattered behind him as he crumpled halfway over the table, then fell sideways onto the floor. A half-choked gasp escaped him as his body stiffened. Screams erupted from the cousins. Someone shouted, "Call 911!" Isolde shoved past chairs to get to him, dropping to her knees at his side, slapping his cheek lightly, over and over. "Marlin, baby, come on, wake up!" He groaned, incoherent. "Someone do something!" she shrieked, but it was what she said next that cracked everything wide open. "No, that wasn't for him. He wasn't supposed to drink it." The room fell into stunned silence. I was still standing, still calm, and now every eye turned toward me. My gaze met hers. "You want to try that again?" I asked her. "I didn't mean," she stammered. "I meant the dosage. His blood pressure's low. He shouldn't be drinking." "No one said anything about dosage," I replied flatly. The lawyer stood up, eyes wide. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Isolde. Someone near the back whispered, "Wait, what did she just say?" Grandma sat bolt upright. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Marcella," she whispered. "What did she mean?" I squeezed her hand. "Exactly what you heard." Isolde's hands were shaking now. "It's not what it sounds like. You drugged a drink," I said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You tried to serve it to me." "I didn't. Marcella, you're twisting this." "No," I said. "You twisted this entire night." The lawyer turned toward me. Should we call someone?" "Now might be a good time to call 911, I replied. "And maybe the police." Isolde stood slowly, her mouth opening and closing, trying to spin another version. "This isn't what it looks like. It was just something to help relax her." "To make me sign papers," I interrupted. "Marlin wasn't supposed to drink it," she blurted again, then instantly clamped a hand over her mouth, realizing what she'd said. Again. The room was dead silent. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one in particular. Too late. Way too late. I walked toward the head of the table where Grandma sat, looking more alert now than she had all night. "Grandma, I think we should get you out of here," I said gently. She nodded, her voice stronger than I expected. "I want to go home." Two cousins stood up, helping to clear the way. Isolde tried to reach for me as I passed her. "Please," she said. "Let's talk. Don't blow this out of proportion." I stopped. You tried to medicate me without my consent, I said. You manipulated our grandmother. You used this entire dinner to orchestrate a takeover of someone else's life, and you were willing to drug me to do it. You don't get to call that a misunderstanding. Her shoulders slumped, and as I stepped past her, I could feel it. The shift, not in power exactly, but in who people believed now. For the first time all night, no one looked at me like I was unstable. They looked at her, and that was everything. The flashing red and blue from the emergency vehicles lit the restaurant windows before I even heard the doors open. The EMTs moved fast, two headed for Marlon while a third asked who was in charge. I pointed at Isolde without hesitation. She was crouched beside him, her hands stained with the wine she had once handed me with a smile. He's got a history of high blood pressure, she said shakily. Maybe it's allergies. I don't know. Maybe he ate something. He didn't eat, I corrected, stepping forward. He drank. She looked at me with daggers. This isn't the time. No, I said evenly. This is exactly the time. One of the officers, a tall woman with a clipboard and a face that said she'd seen worse, turned toward me. And who are you? I reached up and unclasped the necklace around my neck, the small, innocuous pendant I'd worn all evening. I opened my phone, tapped the app that synced to the necklace's embedded recorder, and brought up the video. I'm the one who caught all of it, I said, including her instructing a server to hand me a very specific glass. And her saying that wasn't for him, right after Marlon collapsed. The officer raised her eyebrows slightly. Do you have that video now? I turned the screen around. The footage was clear. Isolde, smiling that tight, PR-approved smile, handing me the wine glass. Then, the whispered words I couldn't forget. The same ones she had screamed later, not realizing her microphone, my necklace, was still live. The officer nodded slowly. We'll need a copy. I forwarded the file to her immediately. As I did, I glanced at the paramedics lifting Marlon onto a stretcher. He was conscious now but groggy, mumbling words that didn't quite form. Isolde stood up slowly, like her legs were made of damp paper. You can't be serious, she said, glancing at the officer. She's trying to frame me. This is family drama, not whatever you think it is. The officer's tone stayed neutral. That's not for me to decide, ma'am, but the video raises questions we have to document. I took a step back. My breathing finally started to slow. Until that moment, I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding everything in. Then I felt a small hand wrap around mine. Marcella, Grandma said, her voice thin but steady. Please don't leave me with them again. Something in me cracked, not in a broken way, in a way that said, finally. I bent down beside her chair and held her gently. You're coming with me tonight, Grandma. She nodded. Behind us, Isolde made a sound, something between a scoff and a sob. You're destroying this family. I looked at her one last time, with all the grace I had left. You did that the moment you chose power over love. She had no response. A few minutes later, my attorney Allison arrived. She'd driven straight from her office, tie undone, laptop under her arm, and a look that could cut granite. Tell me what I missed, she said. I laid it all out for her, the recording, the drugged wine, the guardianship forms, the missing Thanksgiving footage. The erased promises. Allison nodded. We'll get a court injunction. By morning, you'll have legal grounds to revoke the guardianship entirely. What about tonight? I'll call a judge. We'll get an emergency order in place. I turned to the officer still taking statements. She cannot be left with my grandmother, not one more night. Understood, the officer said. Grandma squeezed my hand. The rest of the guests had either quietly exited or moved to the far corners of the dining area, whispering behind napkins. No one wanted to make eye contact with Isolde. No one asked if she was okay. The same lawyer who'd facilitated the evening sat stiffly at the end of the table, fingers tapping a closed briefcase. You might want to get your client another lawyer, I told him. I'm just here in a consulting role, he replied quickly. Not anymore, I said. Outside, the air was sharp. The sirens had faded into the distance, and the night had returned to stillness. I wrapped Grandma in my coat and guided her gently into the car Allison had arranged. The backseat ride to the hotel was quiet. Grandma rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing soft and even. For once, I didn't feel like a child seeking her approval. I felt like the one keeping her safe. As we pulled up to the hotel entrance, I helped her inside. A staff member brought extra blankets. The room wasn't fancy, but it was warm, quiet, and hers, for tonight. Before heading back down to meet Allison in the lobby, I knelt beside Grandma. "Do you remember what you told me last Thanksgiving?" She smiled faintly. "I said you were the only one who still visited me because you wanted to, not because you had to." I kissed her forehead. "That's still true." She squeezed my hand one last time before drifting to sleep. In the hallway, I met Allison with the paperwork she had printed and notarized. Her phone was buzzing with updates from the court clerk. "We'll serve her in the morning," she said, "but for now, she's off anything related to your grandmother." As we walked toward the elevator, she asked quietly, "You sure you want to do this? Once it's filed, there's no going back." I didn't hesitate. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about accountability." She nodded. We stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, I realized I no longer felt like the outsider in my own family's story. For the first time in years, I was the one holding the pen to write what came next. The morning sun crept through the blinds of my kitchen window, casting pale strips of light across the counter where 2 mugs of tea sat steaming. I poured one for myself, the other for Grandma. She was in the living room, curled up on the recliner she'd claimed as hers the first night she moved in. It had been 3 weeks since the dinner. 3 weeks since the wine glass, the collapse, the sirens. Since then, life had not exactly returned to normal, because normal, I was learning, had never really been safe. But there was peace, and quiet, and finally, clarity. The court granted emergency guardianship within 48 hours of the incident. Within a week, the paperwork had been finalized. Evelyn was officially under my care. Not Isolde's, not the lawyer's. Mine. She now lived with me full-time. I'd set up the spare room with soft linens, the blanket she always preferred from her old house, and a framed picture of her holding my hand when I was a toddler. A subtle reminder. I had always been here. Odette returned too, her presence a welcome comfort. She stopped by twice a week with groceries and homemade soup, always making sure Evelyn had someone familiar around when I had work calls or errands. The house felt less like a fortress now, and more like a home, but there were costs. A few extended relatives, mostly the ones who only ever showed up for holiday photos, made comments. She should have kept it private. I mean, did she have to go that far? Families handle things behind closed doors for a reason. I heard it all. At church, at the post office, even whispered near the pharmacy counter. But I stood by every choice I made. Truth has a price, yes. But silence would have cost us everything. Evelyn wasn't some confused woman waiting to be managed. She was a person, a history, and every time I watched her slowly sip tea on our back porch, I felt the vindication settle into something softer, something like healing. This afternoon, we sat together outside, a light breeze moving through the hydrangeas. The sun made her skin look softer, like she was made of something kinder than all of this world had thrown at her. She looked over at me, her voice a little raspy, but clear. "You remembered." I didn't ask what she meant. I just smiled. I always did. She reached out and touched my hand. There was a time when I would have burst into tears at a moment like that, overwhelmed with emotion. But not anymore. Now I held her gaze, steady and certain. A week after the court order, Isolde's world began to unravel. Her financial advisor license was revoked, publicly. The court ruled her manipulation of the guardianship documents unethical and exploitative. As part of the settlement, she was required to issue a public apology, both online and in local print media. The headline read, "Family Betrayal, Financial Professional Apologizes for Mishandling Elder Affairs." I didn't gloat. I didn't even save the article. Her daughter, the one who'd received Grandma's heirloom ring during that cursed dinner, mailed it back. No note from Isolde. Just a folded piece of lined paper in teenage handwriting. She says it never felt like hers anyway. I kept the ring in a small wooden box in my dresser drawer. I hadn't put it on yet. Maybe I would someday. Maybe I wouldn't. The ring wasn't the point anymore. Some evenings, when Evelyn naps in the living room, I sit nearby with a book and glance at her now and then. There's something in her face when she sleeps. Peace, yes, but also a kind of safety I hadn't seen there in years. That's when I know it was all worth it. All the pain, the public scrutiny, the family division. Because now she was safe, and so was I. People like to think the hardest part is fighting the battle. It's not. The hardest part is waking up afterward and realizing there's no ribbon to cut, no applause waiting for you in the kitchen. There's just you, and the quiet, and the long work of healing. And you do it anyway, because dignity is never given freely. You protect it, you claim it, you hold it in your hands like something fragile, and you fight to make sure it doesn't slip through your fingers again. I didn't hate my sister, not anymore, but I no longer protected her either. That, in itself, was its own kind of freedom. As the sun began to set, Evelyn stirred. She looked at me through sleepy eyes, then back out toward the horizon. "We're okay now," she said. And we were. We were more than okay. And if you ever find yourself holding a glass, unsure who poured it, listen closely for the voice that tells you not to drink. Sometimes, the people who share your last name aren't the ones who truly protect you. And sometimes, the voice everyone else ignores, the one they call confused or irrelevant, is the only one that's telling the truth. Have you ever been in a situation where trusting your gut saved you from something much darker? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this family story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, true-feeling stories that stay with you long after they're told.